After more than 15 years, Nike and Brand Jordan have decided to bring back the Columbia and Oreo Air Jordan 4 Retros. These shoes were originally released way back in 1999, and 1999 was Nike's second attempt to retro the Air Jordan line. And you'll recall that in 1994, Nike retroed 6 different Air Jordans. It was 2 colors of the 1, 2, and 3, and the retro releases failed miserably. Those shoes hit clearance racks and sometimes made it down to like 1999. 5 years later, in 1999, Nike decided that they were going to try this retro thing again. And they tried it with some of their best models. 4s, 5s, eventually they did the deep infrared 6s a couple years later, Nike Air 3s, some 11s. They really wanted to use the heavy hitters to see if they could make this retro thing work. And it did. And retros have been coming out strong ever since. In addition to starting off with some of the better models this second time around, not that the first time around wasn't amazing models with the 1, 2, and 3, but in addition to starting out with these amazing models like 4s and 5s, the prices were very, very reasonable. The original Columbia 4s and Oreo 4s were actually just $100. Using the inflation calculator, that's $140 by today's standards, which is exactly what the grade school models costed. This time around with the remastered editions, Nike released these 2 colors for the whole family. But back in 1999, when they were trying this retro thing out again, these shoes only came out for men. Back then, the shoes were called plus models. That's something that Nike was doing for the non-original colorways for a while. In addition to these ones, there were bling 4s, laney 5s, white and silver 5s, the same ones that are coming out very soon. Olympic 6s, midnight navy 6s, deep infrared 6s was sort of like an OG color, just a different shade of infrared, and that had the plus model. But this time around, these are being called, check it out, the LS edition, which stands for lifestyle, and that's not the first time that Brand Jordan has used LS on some of their models. The Thunder and Lightning original releases were LSs, same thing with the 2006 Grapes. I wish Nike would be consistent and explain what they mean by a plus or an LS. Eventually that plus ended up meaning that shoes were compatible with iPods, and that made things even more confusing. And before that there were Air Max pluses with tuned air, so pluses were even more confusing. But anyway, back to these shoes. So they came out early on in 2015 with a very inflated price of $190. Remastered and ridiculous. What I want to say is when you look at the quality of the shoes and the craftsmanship of the shoes, I think that what Nike basically did was take the leather material that makes up the predominant portion of the upper and step it up a notch. They made it tumbled, which also masks a lot of flaws, but when you look closely at the shoes, they are very flawed. And there's all sorts of glue marks on them. One thing that they were trying to do with this remastered line was pay attention to the details. Jumpmans were supposed to have laces and also fingers on there. But look at this Jumpman. It's got smudges that look sort of like an eye, a nose, and a smiley face. I had no idea that it was going to include Michael's face in the remastered editions. But also just look at the shoes next to one another. The Oreos and the Columbias. The tongue on the left shoe is like so messed up compared to the right shoe. The quality control on these shoes is just not up to par. But think about it, they're making hundreds of thousands of models of Air Jordans, and it's somebody's job in the factory to look at each and every one and make sure it's good to go. But honestly, I would say with a Jumpman logo that's all smudged up like that, especially when they're saying that they're focusing on the Jumpman logo and stepping it up, it's unacceptable, and this shoe should have been a B grade. Now let's come over here and look at the Columbias. Now actually this year, these are being called the Legend Blue 4s, and Nike did the same thing with the 11s that came out for Christmas. They changed up the colorway. Originally, you'll recall that they were called Columbia 11s, but then this time around they did Legend 11s. They might do that so that people don't call them out for having different shades of blue, but for whatever reason, these are Legend Blue 4s. A lot of tumbled leather on these uppers. Something that I've noticed though, when you look at the shoes, it almost seems like one shoe has a different kind of tumbled leather than another. Like this one right here seems more premium than this one. But what really upsets me about this shoe, and I hope you can see this, there's like a dent right here. And like when you're buying a brand new pair of shoes and you put them on your feet and you look down, the last thing you want to see is like a big mess up in the leather. And that's what's right here. I think that this shoe should have been spotted too and also put off and called a B grade. Honestly, it's one thing to step up the leather, but the craftsmanship and the details really needs to be looked at. So I bought these shoes for my wife. I want to break out Natalie's pairs, and honestly, they're even worse than the men's pairs. Let's start over here with the Oreos. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm glad that they're making these shoes for the family. It's great that you can buy these shoes for your girlfriend, your wife, your kids. But honestly, like, they're just not doing what they said they were going to do. Look at the creases on this toe right here. It looks like somebody put on the right shoe and walked around the factory. And the glue marks on this pair are just like terrible, right around the outsole going up to the leather. It's very hard to tell with the iPhone and this lighting, but trust me, if you had this pair of shoes in your hand, you would see glue all over here. They really need to do a better job. That being said, shoes are meant to be worn. And, you know, I collected them, I built a museum with them, but I feel like it's a different era now. And these shoes are not meant to be coveted. They're meant to be worn. So I guess like the little flaws don't mean that much, but still it's disappointing when you're paying $190 for men's or $140 for kids and the shoes are flawed. Check out the Columbias. I hope Natalie doesn't see this video. She's going to think the gifts I bought her are like B grade. But anyway, look at the toes right here. You can see that there's almost like a little nipple coming up here on the front leather. I'll bring them closer. I looked at that and I was like, huh, that's weird. Those aren't on the men's pairs. And then I grabbed the Oreo pair. And same thing, there's not that little extra nipple right there. So it's like, how come Nike was able to make the black pair without that flaw, but then the Legend Blues are flawed? Check this out though. I think this is maybe the worst of all. The back of this shoe has like a tail on it. Look at that. Let's see. I want to make sure that you can see this. There's like this extra piece of glue hanging off here. So honestly, I'm going to like prune this thing like Mr. Miyagi and a bonsai tree. See if I can cut off this extra glue. But I just think it's unacceptable. Like for $140 for a pair of kids' shoes, they shouldn't have flaws like this. Remastered or ridiculous. I would say that Nike probably spends less than $1 to step up the premium leather, and they're charging us way more. And I really think that the quality control needs to be stepped up in the factories. You know, I'm going to wear these shoes, so it's not the end of the world. They're not museum pieces. And most of the shoes that Nike and Jordan Brand are cranking out are not museum pieces. They needed to remaster the line. If you think about the Sport Blue 6s, the black and Sport Blue 3s, I mean, they were so sloppy. So I'm glad they're at least focusing on this, but I think they need to execute better.